Today we observe art from Baya, a woman from North Africa who challenged Orientalist conventions through abstraction. Her work also served to dispel the Eurocentric notion that African art's primitive, considering she probably inspired Picasso and is the direct subject of an essay from the founder of Surrealist theory. It's safe to say she was ahead of the curve. Baya was born Fatima Haddad in Algeria in 1931. She was orphaned at the age of 5 and raised by her grandmother until a Frenchwoman who was well connected to the art scene named Marguerite Caminat came across her and offered her a protectorate. There's not a great deal of information surrounding their relationship, but apparently it was one more of servitude, where Baya would clean and do housework and in turn be provided with a place to sleep and some art supplies. Now, through a modern lens, this relationship is odd, and I can't really comment on Caminat's intention in scouting out artists from North Africa, which at this time was under French occupation, nor how that plays into the wider context of imperialism and art and that relationship. But it certainly provided Baya with the opportunity to develop her skill, and taken in the context of arts in North Africa, at least before 1963, when the French established their school of fine arts in Algeria, this was a rare opportunity. And Caminat's protectorate also opened the door to her meeting some of the great European artists of that age, spending time in the galleries in the south of France with the well-connected guardian will kind of do that. Picasso reportedly saw her, I think, working in a studio and was jealous of her talent. But also the guy behind Surrealism, the founder of the theory, Andre Breton, wrote an entire essay going on and on about her. Now, with all this talk of Europe, I have to kind of disclaim that I'm not considering her a diasporic artist, mainly because she refused to accept the European labels like being a surrealist, but she also spent a substantially larger portion of her lifetime producing art in Algeria than she did ever learning in France. It just seemed like a lucky opportunity. Now, our first artwork by Baya is a woman in a yellow dress with a basket. It's made in 1947, and which for that time, this is pretty cutting edge abstraction. It's a woman dressed in traditional, vibrantly colored kaibel cloth. She's holding a basket, and the painting feels relatively static, like she's just kind of standing there. The background is also fairly empty and dark compared to most of her other works, but there's some vegetation, and with her hair, obviously there's wonderful patterned fabric. She's holding a basket, like the title says, but I'm not sure if her hair is just like that, if the top parts are flowers embedded in it, if the bottom part's like a braid or like a dew. I have no clue, but I really dig this. I was kind of wondering whether the medium and the choice to use gouache was of any importance. It's usually cheaper paint, but it's harder to work with from like a blending standpoint, and it's extremely flat. It's like prints on fabric, which I don't know if that's what she was going for, but I love it. And I guess most importantly, the stylization of the woman, the side profile with very bird-like features, kind of harkens works from other artists like Renoir and Delacroix. It's oriental feeling, and I think that's the point. I feel as though this comparison is best made to the woman with the downward glaze and the leftmost painting, the Delacroix's Woman of Algiers, and the bottommost figure in Renoir's Parisiennes and Algerian costume. They both have that same, like, elongated, just facial structure, and while the earlier work by Delacroix is more vibrant in color, there's no abstraction, and gathered it's not an Algerian person painting these. This is European depiction of another culture with the intent of, like, I guess being infatuated by it. It's just another racist convention. But with Baya hyper stylizing her woman to resemble these kind of paintings and abstracting it and mixing it in with her own traditional elements, It establishes this kind of dominance. Like, she's doing it because she should. One could say reclaiming. Now, for the second artwork, we're focusing on two women, also a gouache on board. This time, the traditional Kaiba patterns are also featured, along with heavy abstraction of the figures and clothing, which at this point is becoming thematic across a lot of Baya's paintings. And the same bird-like faces are there, but this piece just feels a bit more dynamic. The hands are interlocking, and the line of pink flowers dividing the piece offers a solid sense of balance. My favorite thing, I guess, would be how the left arm of the woman is just sort of implied. Like the way her shoulder shape and body twisted just makes it seem like there's an arm there. Like you can tell what way her hand would be positioned, but you can't see any portion of it, unlike the figure on the right. I think this specific stylization could be a nod to Orientalism too. Like the figure in Ingress's Le Grand Odalisque, how all the proportions, like conceptually under the veil, would be very goofy. There's none of that. It's just it's just there. It feels quite natural. Obviously, the figure on the right has some anatomically inaccurate proportions, but that element is striking. And then, I guess as Baya's paintings progress, the canvases just become more filled with abstract figures and objects. Like, looking at this, I feel like if you just outlined it in really heavy, bold blacks, it would just be a Picasso. It makes sense why he claimed it, or why it was claimed that Picasso was jealous of her skill. I suppose what doesn't make sense, though, is why a reversion to focusing on African subjects, or really anything having to do with Africa, was collectively referred to as primitivism or primitive, with the implication that anything African was lesser than that in Europe. The two paintings from Picasso's Women in Algeria series depicted below, like I kind of just said, I like to think that if you remove the harsh black outlines and the large voids of empty space, especially in the version O, it would just be a Baya. One could mistake it for a Baya. There are the same vibrant colors, patterns, and twisted proportions, and I kind of see it as the same attempt to assert dominance over an established style. It just doesn't work, at least for me, because it's not from an artist who can effectively exert themselves over the culture or over any derivation of the culture. I just don't think it's appropriate to at least continue Oriental convention, especially when they're cognizant of it. It's a whole different tangent. But this brings me back to Baya's refusal to accept the label of being a surrealist. I think it would detract from the legitimacy of her dominance over Orientalism, which also ties back into what I just said. I suppose it's because I guess she was belonging to the culture that was on the receiving end of the racist Orientalism. Her abstraction and application of her personal themes creates the strength over the convention that an outsider like Picasso can't. Even if he's not trying, even if he's not trying to, no matter how hard he distorts the figures, there was some attempt to take something and build off of it. I don't think that's accomplished as effectively by someone who's actually from the culture who you were trying to tear down, or your conventions were trying to tear down. This all brings me to the final point, that she was a surrealist before it was cool, regardless whether or not she chooses to accept the label. And how can someone belong to a primitive culture when what they're doing is actively transcending it? What they've been doing has been transcending it. I suppose, I guess I just leave you to wonder, is intention ever separate from the artist? Like, can Picasso represent Algerian subjects and convey a meaning or transcend the thing by abstracting it as strong as Baya could without falling into the same convention? Not separate the art from the artist, just separate the intention from the art. Can that be accomplished?